She slammed the door without a second glance, her voice trembling with anger as she spat the words, "Those are not my grandchildren." That was the last time Maya ever saw her mother. At just 23, Maya had made a choice that defied tradition, falling in love with Darnell, a kind, ambitious black man from Chicago. And when she gave birth to beautiful, mixed-race triplets, it wasn't joy that greeted her family, but judgment. Her mother, Eleanor, a proud Southern woman with deep-seated prejudices, disowned her on the spot, cutting all ties without remorse. No visits, no birthday calls, not a single photo frame hung on Eleanor's wall. But what she didn't know was that life had a strange way of circling back. 28 years later, the same woman who once turned her back on her blood would sit in a silent room, trembling as she listened to the lawyer read her own will, leaving everything to the very children she had rejected. And what happened next? No one could have seen coming. Maya had always been her mother's pride, the golden girl of a traditional Southern family, raised in a home where appearances meant everything and family reputation was sacred. She was smart, polite, soft-spoken, and raised to follow the rules. But life has a way of bending even the most carefully laid out paths, and for Maya, that curve came in the form of a man named Darnell. They met during Maya's junior year at the University of Michigan. She was studying early childhood education. He was majoring in political science. What began as long study nights and late coffee breaks quickly evolved into something deeper, a quiet kind of love that neither of them saw coming. Darnell was charismatic, thoughtful, the kind of man who held the door open, remembered birthdays, and listened like your words actually mattered. And he was black. That fact alone, Maya knew, would unravel everything at home. Still, she kept it a secret for months. Every visit back to Georgia was filled with half-truths and dodged questions. She loved her family, especially her mother, Eleanor, a woman who always wore pearls to church and believed in keeping things proper. Eleanor had grown up in a segregated town and, despite the passing of decades, still saw the world through a lens clouded by fear and prejudice. She didn't hate people of color, she claimed. She just believed that people should stay with their own kind. But love, real love, doesn't ask permission. By the time Maya realized she was pregnant, she knew hiding was no longer an option. The day she told her mother was the day everything shattered. It was a warm Sunday afternoon. Eleanor had just returned from church, still in her blue floral dress and matching hat. Maya sat her down at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she reached for her mother's. "Mama," she said, barely above a whisper, "I'm pregnant." Eleanor blinked, a pause, then a cautious smile. "Well, I suppose congratulations are in order. Who's the father?" When Maya said Darnell's name, Eleanor's expression didn't change at first. It was as if her mind needed a moment to process what it had just heard. Then came the shift. The color drained from her face. The smile vanished, replaced with a coldness Maya had never seen before. "He's black." Eleanor's voice was barely audible. Maya nodded slowly. "And you think this is okay? You think this is how I raised you?" The accusations came like bullets. "You've humiliated this family. What will the neighbors think? What will the church say?" Maya tried to explain, to plead, to ask for understanding, but her mother had already stood up, chair scraping against the tile. "Get out," she said, "and don't come back here with those children, ever." The door closed behind Maya with a finality that crushed her spirit. She drove back to Michigan in silence, tears blurring her vision, one hand resting protectively over her belly. She wasn't just mourning her mother's rejection. She was mourning the death of the life she thought she'd have. Darnell, though shaken, remained her rock. He didn't flinch. He took on more shifts at the local post office, worked late into the nights, and when Maya broke down on the floor one night, whispering, "I don't think I can do this," He knelt beside her and said, "We'll do this together." Always. 7 months later, Maya went into labor earlier than expected. It was chaotic, painful, and terrifying. But when she heard the first cries, not of one baby, but three, she forgot everything else. Three perfect little beings. One boy, two girls. Their skin was a soft shade of honey, their curls tight and springy, their eyes full of questions and promise. The nurses smiled warmly, but Maya noticed the lingering stares, the curious looks. It was subtle but real. She called her mother from the hospital room, hands shaking as she held the phone. No answer. She tried again and again until finally, on the third day, Eleanor picked up. Maya's voice cracked with hope. "Mama, I had them, triplets. They're beautiful." A long pause. Then came the cold reply, "Those aren't my grandchildren," followed by a click. The line went dead. Maya stared at the phone for a long time. She didn't cry, not this time. Instead, she looked at her babies and promised them everything: love, protection, and a home where they'd never feel unworthy. The following months were brutal. 3 newborns, no family support. Money was tight. There were nights Maya didn't eat so the babies could. Darnell started driving for a delivery service on top of his job. Maya took freelance tutoring jobs from home while nursing 3 infants. But even in the exhaustion, there was joy. Little things. A gummy smile from Malik, Ava's tiny fingers curling around hers, Jalen babbling "mama" at 5 months, reminded her why it was all worth it. She tried one more time to send her mother a photo. A beautiful shot of the triplets in matching outfits, their first Christmas. It was returned, unopened, with no note. Years passed. The rejection remained, but so did Maya's determination. She created traditions of her own: homemade birthday cakes, bedtime stories, park picnics. She taught her children to be proud of every part of themselves. And while the absence of a grandmother left a visible void, Maya never poisoned their hearts with bitterness. She simply said, "Some people aren't ready to see the beauty in what's different." What Maya didn't know was that Eleanor had kept that Christmas photo, not on the fridge, not on the mantle, but folded quietly and tucked away in a drawer. She never looked at it, not then, but she couldn't throw it away either. In the world outside their small apartment, time marched on. The triplets grew, thriving in ways Eleanor could never have predicted. But the pain of that door slamming, the sharp, heart-wrenching sound of being cast out by someone who was supposed to love unconditionally, stayed with Maya. And yet, through it all, she never let it define her. Because love, true, fearless, resilient love, was something she gave her children without conditions. The very thing she was denied became the gift she gave threefold. And while Eleanor's rejection cast a shadow on the beginning of their lives, what none of them knew was that life was far from done writing the story. The months after the triplets' birth blurred into a haze of sleepless nights, diaper changes, whispered lullabies, and mounting bills. Maya and Darnell did what many young parents do. They survived by love, by grit, and by pure determination. But behind every joyful moment was a quiet ache, a shadow that lingered in corners no one else could see. The absence of family, of a mother who'd chosen silence over forgiveness. Every milestone, every scraped knee, every first word should have been something they shared with grandparents. But Eleanor had made her decision loud and clear. She hadn't just closed the door, she'd locked it, bolted it, and thrown away the key. The rejection didn't end with words. It came in small, cutting gestures that Maya would never forget. When she sent a birth announcement in a hand-addressed envelope, it came back unopened, returned with "refused" scribbled in angry red ink. At Christmas time, she wrapped a carefully chosen gift, a silver charm bracelet engraved with "Grandma," and mailed it with a card signed by the triplets in baby scribbles. Weeks later, the same box showed up on her doorstep, the wrapping paper torn, the card missing, no note inside. It was cruelty in silence. And still, Maya kept trying. She once sent an email, just one, after Malik was hospitalized with RSV. She'd stared at the blinking cursor for 20 minutes before typing, "He's okay now. We just thought you should know." The message was never answered. Not even a one-word reply. Not even a question. The rejection became a presence all its own, one Maya carried like a second skin, invisible to others but deeply felt every time she watched a grandmother walk hand in hand with a child in the park. And yet, Maya never let that pain poison the way she raised her children. She never badmouthed a leaner, never filled their ears with bitterness. "Grandma just needs more time," she'd say gently when Ava asked why she didn't come to birthdays. "Some people aren't ready for change, but that doesn't mean we stop loving them." It was a lesson in grace, and Maya lived it every day, even when it hurt. Darnell, for his part, bore the rejection differently. He hadn't expected open arms from a leaner, but her level of disdain still stung. He was a good man. He worked 2 jobs. He came home exhausted but never too tired to feed the babies, read them stories, or rock them to sleep when nightmares came. He deserved more than contempt. But what hurt him most was knowing his kids were growing up without knowing a grandmother who lived just 2 states away. The cold cutoff rippled beyond just family dynamics. It impacted finances, mental health, and their sense of belonging. When most parents leaned on grandparents for childcare or emergency help, Maya and Darnell had no such safety net. When the car broke down, they carpooled with neighbors. When the fridge was empty, they rationed. When Maya needed surgery for a ruptured appendix, Darnell had to bring all 3 toddlers into the hospital waiting room, juggling snacks and cartoons on his phone to keep them calm. And yet, through all of that, they built something extraordinary. The triplets, despite the odds, thrived. Jalen was the curious one, always asking questions, building towers out of blocks and questioning how clouds floated. Ava was nurturing and sensitive. She comforted other kids at daycare, hugged her teachers, and whispered affirmations to her brothers before bedtime. Malik was fearless, bold, the first to try climbing, diving, running. Together, they were a team. And Maya, though stretched thin, gave them everything she could: her time, her wisdom, her unwavering love. One summer afternoon, when the triplets were about 6, Ava came home from school unusually quiet. Maya found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding a family tree worksheet from class. "Mama," she asked, "where's Grandma Leaner?" Maya paused. It would have been easy to lie, to say Grandma was far away or busy or ill. But she looked into her daughter's wide brown eyes and decided on a different truth. "She's still here, baby, but she's hurting. And when people hurt inside, sometimes they don't know how to show love. Not yet." Ava nodded slowly. Then, with a child's impossible hope, she whispered, "Can we send her a picture anyway?" So they did. Every year after that, Ava insisted on sending a leaner a birthday card, handmade, filled with glitter, hearts, drawings of stick-figure grandmas and grandkids holding hands. Maya never stopped her. She even helped address the envelopes. And though they never received a single reply, Alina never returned those cards. Not one. Somewhere behind her thick walls and heavy silence, Alina was still listening, still watching. She once told a neighbor that she didn't have grandchildren, but she kept those cards in a shoebox in her closet. She never spoke of them, but she never threw them out. Years rolled by. The kids entered middle school, then high school. Jalen joined debate team and wrote op-eds about race and identity. Ava took up science fairs and talked about becoming a doctor. Malik became the star athlete and captain of the robotics team. Maya watched them grow into themselves, brilliant, beautiful, kind, everything she'd hoped for and more. But through every graduation ceremony, every talent show, there was still one empty seat, one invitation never accepted. Occasionally, Maya thought about reaching out again. Just one last try, but something always stopped her. Not anger, just self-preservation. You can only knock on a locked door so many times before you bleed. What Alina never understood was that her silence said more than any insult ever could. It told her grandchildren that they weren't welcome, that their very existence was an affront. And still, somehow, they grew up without hate in their hearts. Because Maya had built something Alina had never been brave enough to imagine. A family forged not by shared bloodlines or social acceptance, but by radical, unconditional love. By the time the triplets were in college, the cold cutoff had become a quiet void. It no longer consumed them, but it shaped them. It taught them about resilience. It reminded them that family isn't always a title, it's an action. And what none of them knew, what not even Maya could have guessed, was that time the one thing Alina believed was on her side was slowly running out. In a quiet house in Georgia, Alina now lived alone. Her husband had passed. Her friends were few. Her health was beginning to fade. And late at night, when the house creaked and the wind stirred memories long buried, Alina found herself opening that shoebox more often. She traced Ava's glitter hearts with shaking fingers. She reread a card from Malik, who had once drawn himself and a smiling grandma flying kites in a park they'd never visited. She never answered, but the silence began to feel heavier. Not like defiance, but regret. And somewhere deep in that old woman's heart, something had begun to thaw. By the time the triplets turned 18, they had grown into three remarkably different, yet tightly bound individuals, each shaped by the same past, but molded by their own passions, battles, and dreams. Their journey from wide-eyed toddlers in a cramped apartment to confident young adults was not just a story of growth. It was a testament to resilience. Because what they lacked in grandparents, in family photo albums, in the soft cushion of generational support, they made up for in grit, brilliance, and a bond that refused to break. Jalen was always the thinker. As a child, he'd ask impossible questions about fairness and justice, about why some people were treated differently just because of how they looked. He devoured books like other kids devoured candy. By the time he was 10, he'd already read Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings and had started scribbling poetry in a weathered notebook. In high school, he joined the debate team and quickly became a star, his arguments sharp but never cruel, his tone passionate yet patient. He led with empathy, and that made him unstoppable. When he won a regional award for an essay on interracial identity, he stood on stage, gripping the microphone with both hands and said, "I am the legacy of people who loved across a line others told them not to cross. I don't just stand here because of them, I stand here for them." The crowd gave him a standing ovation, and somewhere miles away, a grandmother he'd never met would one day read that speech in a quiet room, her hands trembling. Ava, on the other hand, was the heart of the family. Sensitive, intuitive, and endlessly curious, she saw the world in layers. She had an early fascination with science, especially genetics, a subject she loved for its quiet irony. "DNA doesn't lie," she once told her teacher. "It doesn't care about race or rules or prejudice. It just tells the truth." She volunteered at hospitals during high school, comforting elderly patients and reading to sick children, always looking for the soul behind the symptoms. She would go on to earn a full scholarship to a top-tier university, majoring in biomedical science. But long before that, she was the glue that held her siblings together. When Jalen got anxious before a debate, Ava was the one who whispered affirmations. When Malik sprained his ankle in a game, it was Ava who skipped her own club meeting to ice his foot and make him laugh. And every single year, no matter how many birthdays went unanswered, Ava still made cards for Alina. She decorated them with care, always signing them with "Love, your granddaughter." And while the silence on the other end remained deafening, she never stopped believing in the possibility of change. Then there was Malik, the fire in the trio. Athletic, innovative, and endlessly curious about how things worked, he was the kind of kid who took apart the family toaster just to see if he could rebuild it faster. He loved movement, running, jumping, testing limits, but he also had a quiet genius for machines. In high school, he started a robotics club and built a drone that won state competition. While coaches tried to push him toward football scholarships, Malik chose to pursue engineering. "I don't just want to be the kid who runs fast," he once told his mom. "I want to build something that lasts." By 20, he had launched a small startup designing affordable home security systems for low-income neighborhoods. He named the company Triotech in honor of his siblings and made sure Maya had the very first system installed for free. Despite their separate paths, the triplets remained inseparable in spirit. Holidays were sacred, even when distance grew. They texted every morning in their group chat. "Three beats, one heart," they liked to say. And behind every success was Maya, watching, cheering, sacrificing quietly. She never remarried. She never asked her children to become anything other than themselves. And when they brought home trophies, awards, scholarships, she didn't say, "I'm proud of you because of what you've done." She said, "I'm proud of you because of who you are." What none of them knew during those years of growth and glory was that somewhere, deep in Georgia, the woman who once disowned them had been watching. Not directly, not through letters or visits, but quietly, subtly, through whispers in her church group, through newspaper clippings mailed anonymously, through Google searches she never admitted aloud. Alina, now in her 80s, had aged in solitude. Her friends had either passed or drifted. Her husband, Thomas, had died without ever meeting his grandchildren. The big house she once claimed with such pride now echoed with silence and regret. One day, her neighbor, a cheerful retired teacher named Rosa, stopped by with a plate of lemon bars and a stack of mail. Among the bills and catalogs was a local magazine featuring young black leaders to watch. There, in bold letters, was an article on Jalen, the civil rights advocate, the lawyer who had just won a major case involving housing discrimination. The photo showed him standing with two others: Ava, now in medical school, and Malik, the tech entrepreneur whose company had just secured its first major grant. "They're siblings," the caption read, "born to an interracial couple who defied rejection to raise three of the most promising minds of their generation." Alina dropped the plate. Rosa rushed to help her, but Alina just stood there, staring at the photo. Her lips moved silently as she read the names. She traced their faces with a wrinkled finger. There was something about Ava's eyes, something about Malik's grin, something about Jalen's quiet strength. They looked like her daughter. They looked like her. That night, Alina sat in her favorite armchair, holding the magazine against her chest. The silence around her was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. She thought about the birthday cards she'd hidden for over a decade. She remembered the tiny handwriting, the stickers, the drawings. She remembered the silver bracelet she'd thrown back in a box. For years, she'd told herself she was protecting her values, her family's name, her Southern legacy. But now, staring at the lives she'd refused to be part of, she wasn't sure what she had protected, only what she had lost. And so, quietly, for the first time in nearly 30 years, Alina called her lawyer. She asked one question: "If I wanted to change my will, what would I need to do?" It was the first crack in a wall she'd built decades ago. A wall that, brick by brick, had cost her the very thing she now longed for: a connection to the future she never believed could exist. The triplets had risen, not in spite of Eleanor's rejection, but in quiet defiance of it. They had turned absence into fuel, pain into purpose. And while they had never needed Eleanor to succeed, her choice now would determine whether she remained a distant ghost or became a late chapter in a story still being written. Eleanor had always prided herself on control. Her house was spotless, her routines rigid, her opinions firmly rooted in tradition. But time, unlike her, did not ask permission to change. It crept in through the cracks of her quiet Georgia home, softening her once iron-bound will. Her body began to fail her first. Stiff knees, trembling hands, blurred vision. Then came the fall. One ordinary morning in the kitchen, her hand slipped on a glass of orange juice, and down she went. The sound of her body hitting the tile echoed like thunder. She lay there for hours before Rosa, her neighbor, found her. The doctors called it a minor stroke. The truth was, it was a turning point. Recovery was slow, and the solitude that once felt like sanctuary became unbearable. Days bled into each other. The silence was too loud, the nights too long. And in those quiet hours, regret began to whisper louder than pride ever had. She started revisiting the shoebox, where she had kept every one of Ava's birthday cards, even the ones smeared with glitter and crayon. She'd always told herself she saved them out of duty. But now, looking at the soft curls Ava had drawn on each stick-figure self-portrait, Eleanor felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: shame. One afternoon, Rosa came by with warm soup and a book titled The Power of Forgiveness. She'd always known Eleanor as stern but never cruel, and over time she gently asked questions. Who were the children in those cards? Why had she never mentioned grandchildren? Eleanor didn't answer, not at first, but grief and age have a way of loosening lips. Eventually the story came out. The rejection, the pride, the silence. Rosa didn't judge her. She simply nodded and said, "You know, sometimes it takes more strength to admit we were wrong than to pretend we never were." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Her heart raced as memories flooded in: Maya's trembling voice at the kitchen table, the sound of the door closing, the silence that followed for almost 3 decades. She realized she didn't remember the last thing she said to her daughter, only that it was sharp, final, cruel. The next morning, she asked Rosa to call her attorney. The conversation was brief but life-altering. "I want to change my will," she said firmly. "Everything goes to my grandchildren." The lawyer was stunned. Eleanor had no known relationship with them, but she didn't waver. "They may not know me," she said quietly, "but I know who they've become. I've watched from the shadows, and it's time I stop hiding behind shame." She insisted on adding a personal letter. Not an apology. She said she wasn't sure she deserved forgiveness, but a confession, a truth. The words were clumsy at first, but over hours, through tears, they found their way. "To the grandchildren I never held, never hugged, never saw grow, I was wrong. Terribly, shamefully wrong. I let fear and pride rob me of decades I will never get back. But I have watched you. I have seen your strength, your brilliance, your kindness. You are everything I didn't understand, but now everything I am proud of. Please accept this gift not as a reward, but as a symbol that people can change, that hearts can soften, and that even the coldest silence can still be broken if only someone listens." Eleanor signed her name with a shaking hand. It would be months before her health took its final turn. She passed away on a rainy spring morning with no family beside her, only Rosa holding her hand, whispering softly. But she left behind more than a name. She left a decision, a letter, a truth, and a story that was no longer one of rejection, but of reckoning. And on the other side of the country, 3 young adults would soon receive a phone call that would change everything. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, quiet and unassuming. Just a soft chime on Maya's cell phone as she watered her plants by the window. She almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, area code from Georgia. But something in her chest told her to pick up. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, a lawyer, a name she didn't recognize. And then the words, "Ms. Maya Thompson, I'm calling in regard to the estate of your late mother, Eleanor Grace Whitmore." Maya froze. For a moment she thought she'd misheard. Her mother, her estate. It didn't make sense. They hadn't spoken in nearly 3 decades. Maya's hands shook as she scribbled down details. A date, a time, a location. Her mother's home, the very place she had been banished from so many years ago. She didn't say anything to the kids right away. How could she? How do you explain that a woman who refused to acknowledge their existence had left behind unfinished business that now reached into their lives? But curiosity gnawed at her, and finally, she sat her children down. Jalen's brow furrowed in quiet confusion. Ava's hands fidgeted in her lap. Malik leaned forward, eyes narrowed, always the one to look for the angle. "Why now?" he asked. "Why would she leave anything to us?" No one had an answer. Still, 3 days later, they stood at the gates of Eleanor's grand southern estate, the same house Maya remembered from childhood, unchanged, immaculate, intimidating. It was surreal. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with silver-rimmed glasses, greeted them with a nod. He led them through the high-ceilinged hallways, past portraits of ancestors who had never known or welcomed the next generation. The house smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. They gathered in the study. Bookshelves lined the walls, and sunlight streamed in through lace-curtained windows. The lawyer opened a thick manila folder and cleared his throat. "Before I read the contents of the will," he said gently, "Mrs. Whitmore asked that I share a letter she wrote to you, her grandchildren." He unfolded the paper and began to read. Eleanor's voice, written, not spoken, filled the room. "I wasted so many years in silence, so many birthdays missed, so many chances to love you, and I turned away. That was my choice, and it was my mistake, but I have seen who you've become. I've read your stories. I've seen your faces in the news, in magazines, in dreams. You are brilliant, brave, and good. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I do hope for your understanding. I can't undo what I did, but I can leave you something to build your future because you are my legacy, whether I ever acted like it or not." By the time the letter ended, the room was silent. Ava wiped away tears. Malik stared out the window. Jalen's jaw was tight, unreadable, and Maya sat perfectly still, as if afraid that moving would break the fragile spell holding her together. The lawyer continued. "According to Mrs. Whitmore's will, the entire estate, including this property, all financial assets and personal belongings, has been left to her 3 biological grandchildren, Jalen, Ava, and Malik Thompson." He paused. "There are no other beneficiaries." Maya's heart skipped a beat. "Wait," she whispered, "all of it." He nodded, every last cent. The weight of that truth settled slowly. This house, this empire, really, was now theirs. From the grandmother who had once said they didn't belong, who had slammed the door before they took their first breath. And now, here they were, keys in hand, standing in the very place that had once been forbidden ground. Malik was the first to speak. "This is surreal." He ran his fingers along the polished edge of an antique desk. "She never wanted us here, and now we own it." Jalen shook his head. "We don't have to accept it." But Ava, soft-spoken as always, said, Maybe it's not about her anymore. Maybe it's about us, and what we do with it now." Maya, overwhelmed, stepped outside for air. Her legs gave out slowly, and she sank onto the steps of the grand porch, her hand over her heart. It wasn't just shock. It was a lifetime of pain surfacing all at once: rejection, survival, and now reconciliation through absence. The triplets followed her, surrounding her in silence. For a moment they didn't say a word, and then Ava knelt beside her mother and said, "She missed out on everything, but we didn't. We had you. And now, maybe this house can be something more than what it used to be." Maya looked up at the sky, blinking through tears. For the first time in years, she felt the weight lift, just a little. The story wasn't over. But the next chapter, it would finally be theirs to write. In the weeks that followed, the estate remained quiet, but no longer cold. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, laughter echoed down the marble halls of Aliner's house. It wasn't the kind of raucous joy born from celebration, but something softer, healing, slow and real. Maya walked through each room with a quiet reverence, tracing the wallpaper of her childhood, now faded. This was the house where she had once learned piano, where she had spilled juice on a Persian rug and gotten scolded for it. It was also the house that became a symbol of shame, then exile. And now, it was something else entirely: a vessel, a second chance. Jalen was the first to suggest turning the estate into something more than just inheritance. "Let's make it count," he said. "Let's make it mean something." At first, Maya wasn't sure what he meant. But as the idea took root, it became clear. They didn't want the house just as a memory. They wanted it to be a movement. Within months, plans began to take shape. Ava led the charge, reaching out to community leaders and educators. They filed the paperwork to convert the estate into a non-profit foundation, the Whitmore Center for Equity and Legacy, named not just to reclaim Aliner's surname, but to rewrite what it stood for. The center would serve as a scholarship hub, mentorship network, and safe space for multiracial youth navigating identity, rejection, and resilience. Malik, with his tech-savvy mind, designed the branding, built the website, and helped launch a virtual mentorship program. Jalen partnered with local law firms to provide free legal guidance to young families facing housing discrimination, families like his own once was. People asked them why they named it after Aliner. Why honor someone who had abandoned them? But their answer was simple: because the lesson came from her, even if it came late, and because change, even slow, painful change, is still change. Meanwhile, the triplets each began writing their own versions of the story. Jalen penned a personal op-ed in a major newspaper titled, "The Grandmother Who Never Met Me Still Taught Me Everything." The article went viral. Ava was invited to speak at diversity panels across the country, sharing how grace, not bitterness, had helped her process generational trauma. Malik's startup expanded, its mission now intertwined with the foundation's cause. And Maya, dear, steady Maya, became the quiet soul of the project. She didn't take the spotlight. She didn't need to. But every person who walked into the Whitmore Center knew she was the heart behind it all. The mother who had raised 3 extraordinary human beings not with wealth, but with courage, love, and unshakable faith in who they could become. One warm afternoon, as they sat beneath the giant oak tree in the backyard, once forbidden land, now full of possibility, Ava asked her mother, "Do you ever wish she'd come around sooner?" Maya didn't answer right away. She looked at the sky, then at her children, then down at her hands. "I used to," she finally said. "I used to imagine what it would have been like, her rocking you as babies, baking cookies at Christmas, clapping for you at school plays. I wanted that life. But maybe if she had come around sooner, we wouldn't be who we are now. Maybe we needed the fire to forge the steel." Silence fell, but it wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful. In the end, Aliner's fainting moment wasn't about shock over who they had become. It was about realization. A collapse not just of body, but of belief. For someone who once clung so tightly to bloodlines and tradition, Seeing the living, breathing legacy of the children she cast aside had been overwhelming. In her final act, she had reached out, not perfectly, not loudly, but sincerely. And that act, small as it may have seemed, opened the door for transformation, not just for her grandchildren, but for herself. And perhaps for anyone willing to unlearn what they were taught, to look again at what they feared and to say, I was wrong, and now I want to make it right. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come in grand gestures or dramatic apologies. Sometimes it comes in a quiet letter, a rewritten will, a key left behind, and the courage of those who choose to use it, not to settle scores but to build something new.